Okay, great. All right, let's get started, everybody. First, I just want to welcome you all to, the AI agents and law, sort of multiplied by law workshop as part of Codex's FutureLaw Week. And it's a big anniversary for FutureLaw, and we couldn't be more pleased than to be part of the great progress that Codex has made and now part of their agenda for the future. And agents, I'm sure everyone's been hearing a lot about them. Some of you I know have been working on AI agents, and it's already becoming a profound transformation accelerator within the law. And we're convening today to start to make some sense of that and to help to craft a broader research agenda. We've got some great speakers coming up that will be taking a look at different aspects of this topic. And our plan is to have a little bit of Q&A speaker by speaker as we set the table, but then and that'll happen from 2 to about 4 p.m. And then we've got the room until 5. And so our thinking is at that point to break into smaller groups, because there's quite a few very different types of topics here, some more technical, some more law practice, some more some other ones related to authorization and all sorts of stuff. And then let people sort of band together in those topics and have conversations, and then a little bit of a report out at the end of that around a little before 5 so we can learn from each other. And then we will have had a very good beginning at that point, which is just almost, this is sort of like a throat clearing exercise as we put this research agenda together and look at future convenings, future prototyping. And I'm really thrilled to say that we're not alone off to the side looking at legal topics here. Rather, this is actually part of a broader initiative here at Stanford in HAI, which is like a major part of Stanford dealing with generative AI and business and kind of society, and the Digital Economy Lab, along with Consumer Reports. And to give us a little bit more of that broader context and to help kick us off and welcome everybody to Stanford, we have none other than Professor Sandy Pentland, my hero.
Come on.
It's free.
So now I have to say something that sounds smart. That's really hard. Anyway, welcome to Stanford. I'm faculty here in the Human-Centered AI Initiative, HI. I also am, interestingly, faculty at MIT, helped create the Media Lab and things like that. So I have a long and checkered history. But what we're doing right now is actually, I think, really, really exciting. And let me just tell you a little story about it. First of all, just to frame it, you all know that every company out there is trying to build agents, and there's going to be agents, and they're all talking to each other, and God knows what's going to happen. In particular, who's going to defend me? We're going to have everybody out there getting me to vote this way or that way or buy this, or, I mean, my God, right? This is going to be a real mess for the individual. And that motivated a conversation about, well, how are we going to regulate this? How are we going to set standards? I'm a big fan of standards because you can do that relatively quickly, and then over time they can evolve into regulation and law. I did that. I ran the discussion at Davos that eventually turned into GDPR, but don't throw stones. It started off a lot better than it ended up. And a variety of other things like that. So we put out a little note to a couple people that we sort of knew and are part of the, oh, is there a problem? Okay, I'm not framed correctly. So we put out a little note to people we thought might be interested. And within 2 weeks, a little less than 2 weeks, we had C-level people from every single major AI company show up. But these are the people who are like the busiest people in the world. We also had C-level people from payers. credit card sort of things, people who build big consumer systems, infrastructure. If you know the company name and it's in IT, they were there. Why are they so interested in that? Well, the reason is actually fairly clear and relevant to this crowd, which is that they see their future and their profit and the stability of the company having to do with building these agent systems. But they also know that agent systems will make mistakes and they will run off the rails, and not necessarily their fault directly. It could be they got some bad data from somebody else's agent. And so the question is, the thing that the board of directors is asking is, well, how do you make sure that we don't have some huge class action thing against us? How do we protect ourselves in a liability sense, but also in a brand sense? And the obvious answer to that is you have to have best practice. This is best practice. You'd like it to actually be a standard where you can say, well, we're going according to the standard, or even something that has legal force. And so you'd like to have agents that represent people that are legal fiduciaries. That's a strong statement. We don't really know how to do that in many cases, but that's what we're going to try. So we got together Consumer Reports, CodeX, Stanford High, a number of other sort of people, and we're going to build things like this. And importantly, we're going to test them. All right, so it's not just a bunch of geeks and lawyers thinking around, oh, I should do this. No, we're actually building things and testing it on Consumer Reports people. So if you remember Consumer Reports, expect to see AI tools, which are supposed to be for you, but we're going to watch them real closely and see how they screw up. Because you remember, there's this thing called social networks that was supposed to save democracy and make the world all well, and it sort of didn't quite turn out that way because we didn't expect a lot of the effects, the second order things, the network effects. So you have to try these things within a sandbox of willing people where you're monitoring what's going wrong and what's going right so that you can really say, this is evidence-based best practice. And if you have that by, well, I guess we'll call Stanford a neutral party, and Consumer Reports has a white hat, then you can protect yourself from liability challenges reasonably well. And that can grow into something else. One of my friends told me about something that is being submitted to the California legislators called the SB 813. And it proposes regulating AI by having best practice created by NGOs. Isn't that interesting, right? And so there'll be certified NGOs who are charged with standard setting, the way that the World Wide Web Consortium, for instance, does, de facto, right? And so it's interesting, and that's sort of exactly what we're trying to do, is follow that logic. And I hope that you will help us figure out what the logic really has to be. And well, part of the plan here, right, is to start off with simple things. You're going to buy a blender, okay? You're not going to have cancer therapy or something or whatever, right? You're going to buy a blender. You want a good one. You want it to be reliable. When it screws up, you want to be able to return it. You want to be able to do all those sort of things, which today are often too complicated, sometimes purposely complicated. You don't want to expose more data than you have to. You want to have control of data that you expose to get this thing. How do we do all that? How do we set those standards? And we think we have reasonable first ideas. And by starting with something simple where the stakes are relatively low, we can then learn enough to be able to go to the higher stakes things. Buying a car, buying a house, maybe some simple medical things. Eventually, we could imagine something where we really understand what agents have to do to represent people and what they need to be safe. So that's the long run goal. That's not going to happen immediately, sorry, right? And it has to be something that companies actually adopt Otherwise, it's this wonderful theory, but not going to happen. So that's just my introduction to it. I should apologize in advance because I have to be next door too, talking about antitrust. So I'll be back and forth. You'll see me probably mostly in the back. Okay, thank you.
Hey, good morning, everybody. This is Ben Moskowitz, the VP of Innovation at Consumer Reports. We're so thrilled to be working with the Stanford Human-Centered AI Institute and with CodeX, and with all of you to define some best practices for consumer authorized agents. When we talk about consumer authorized agents, we often get stuck in our jargon, in our rhetoric, but it's really quite simple. We're excited about a future in which consumers have access to tools that help them research, buy, and troubleshoot more effectively. Tools that help consumers make better informed choices, tools that advocate tirelessly for consumers' interests, and ultimately tools that increase their agency and their power in the marketplace. And we think that those tools are well within reach, but will require a little bit of thought in terms of normative questions, in terms of technical implementation, and in terms of our expectations of what we should be able to expect and trust when we choose an agent to represent us or to advise us. And so we're, again, thrilled to be working with Stanford and with all of you to help shake out some of these questions. Questions around duty of loyalty. How can we ensure that from a governance perspective, agents are incorporated in a way where they are required to work in a consumer's best interest? From a technical perspective, how do we ensure that those agents understand the consumer's intent and in their orchestration are more likely to take actions that are in the consumer's best interest? And there's a whole set of things that need to be solved for, some of which are normative, some of which are standard setting, some of which are applied innovation and applied research. And as far as Consumer Reports is concerned, we see this as part of our mission. We want a healthy and vibrant market where consumers have access to tons of trustworthy agents that help them live their consumer lives better. And in addition to bringing in our consumer protection side of the house, we're really actively engaged in the product R&D and innovation side of this as well, because we believe that it's not just about setting the rules or creating accountability. The best way to shape the future that you want to see is actually to build it. So again, we're so thrilled to have the opportunity to work with all of you. We hope to find lots of ways to take this big vision and make it more concrete. And working with Stanford Human-Centered AI Institute and with CodeX, we look forward to producing papers, code, and ultimately helping build out the ecosystem in a way that will benefit consumers. So thanks again. Sorry I couldn't join you out in Stanford, and hope to see you very soon.
All right. So now, with that excellent sort of context-making overview that Sandy provided, including the broader initiative that this legal track is part of, that was, in a sense, starting today. Let's dive more deeply into the specifics of AI agents and law. First of all, who am I and why am I talking at this podium? So my name is Dazza Greenwood, and I had been and still am somewhat at MIT and Sandy's research group, where I run law.MIT.edu, a computational law research set of activities. And now I've moved back here to the Bay Area 3 years ago. Now I'm very happy to be an affiliate here at CodeX. My area of focus continues to be computational law. And most of what I do with my weekdays is work. And my company is called civics.com. It's legal tech and other types of technology integrations where there's a heavily regulated industry or something like that. But AI, and specifically agents, has been like my secret passion for a long time. In 1989, I wrote my first AI program in Lisp as part of a computer science class, and it was an AI agent, and it was an implementation of something called ELIZA that came out of MIT. It was arguably one of the first popular AI agents, as AI was described at that time. That really kind of got me very curious about this stuff and how it could match up to the science fiction-y stuff of much more featureful and capable agents than we had access to at the time. When I was practicing law at in-house counsel for the government of Massachusetts, which, by the way, that state would be a Fortune 50 company if it were private. So like a lot of desktops, like a lot of platforms, a lot of employees, a lot of stuff going on. Good place to cut teeth. And we also, part of the job of that entity is creating legislation, creating regulation, setting policy. So it's interesting. And as we were moving everything over to electronic methods, because the web was relatively new, e-commerce was new, I had my hands full figuring out, how do we sign something when it's not in ink? How do we have a contract when it's not on paper? These were relatively novel questions, and certainly within government procurement and the industries that we regulated. So we came up with our own approach, Massachusetts Electronic Records and Signatures Act, and then we bound together with other states through the Uniform Law Commission and codified something called the Uniform Electronic Transactions Act, which defines electronic signatures and contracts and records. And that's been enacted across the whole country now, 49 states, all the territories. The other state has a comparable statute. And the reason I'm mentioning it in this context is because it has a section on agents. It's part of the definition. We have 2 or 3 sections in automated transactions and some of the other sections. And so we actually already have, and this is like news to most people who don't remember or weren't born in 1999, but we actually have part of the legal fabric of the United States includes validation of the use of electronic agents, and some very fair rules about, to create predictable legal outcomes when they're used in transactions. I'll come back to that as when we look at some of the implications of the rise of agents within our economy and society and the law. And this is an example of a project in 2011. It was the first autonomous entity project that I started, which is called CorpBot. And I've done a few of those, some of them in Sandy's lab, automated credit union, and some other autonomous, like the algorithmically managed LLCs. Like we've done a few of these. I've been interested in trying to create a legal entity, a business entity that's completely autonomous for a while. Only now with generative AI and with agents do I think it's actually possible. In fact, I think it's inevitable. So anyway, there's a long-standing interest. So I promised you more information about the Uniform Electronic Transactions Act. We're at a law school. Let's just start with what is the law that relates to electronic agents, and then we'll pull back a little bit and look more broadly at the implications of this topic for us. The term electronic agent is defined as it's a computer program. I'll just kind of read the highlights of this, that kind of sends and receives information as part of a transaction. In this case, it just relates to transactions like purchase and sale of goods, license, that sort of stuff. And it works independently, and it performs a task without review or action by the individual. That's pretty good. And it actually took us like 3 years or 2.5 years to finally get that definition. Like first we defined it too much, and then not the right way, and then too little. And we kind of settled on this definition after a while. It's not bad. And you might note that this is similar to what people are now finally talking about. So this, at the time, this was built for, I'll go out of order a little bit here. No, I won't. I'll come back to it later. But at the time, this was built for deterministic type agents, like think high frequency trading, procurement systems. So like we had electronic contracting practices, payment systems were electronic, but we always knew what the output would be for a given set of inputs. But we wrote it this way partly because me and some other people that were at the drafting meetings said, well, we're going to have emergent behavior. We're going to have more complex systems. And we're already seeing some of that stuff in academia and in certain disciplines in science. And so we'll have these agents that we don't necessarily know what the answer will be. We should make sure the law is future-proof to include autonomous agents, not just automated workflows. That's why we wrote it this way. Well, I thought that was going to happen in like a year or two. Here we are 25 years later, but it's happening now. In fact, arguably it has happened. That applies substantively in subsection 2 and 14 to automated transactions. So one electronic agent and like people can create and form a valid enforceable contract. 2 electronic agents or 5 electronic agents can get together interchange, self-negotiate, and conclude and form a valid enforceable electronic contract. This is the law. This is a quote from the law. And then interestingly, one of the issues that was raised when me and other wide-eyed youngsters were saying we'll have emergent behavior and autonomous systems, that the older commercial lawyers said was, well, wait, that sounds crazy. Like, how can we have commerce when you don't know what one of the parties negotiating on your behalf is going to do necessarily? And they were convinced that overall that there was a net positive in this, that we could get higher velocity, better optimization, but there was also potential downsides, and we didn't want unfair results. So Section 10B indicates that when there's an error that's been introduced by the agent that's sort of out of alignment with what the intention of the party it was operating on behalf of had in mind. And as we all know, anyone that's prompted LLMs know, every so often it says something kind of weird. This can happen with agents that are driven by LLMs as well. The rule is that the individual can reverse the transaction unless the party that provided the agent has given them an opportunity to, a means to prevent or correct the error. It's very fair, actually, when you think of it. And that's the law. And this tells us something. We'll hear soon from a collaborator of mine, Andor, who's been building open source reference implementations to show what could it look like within an agent system that's doing purchases for you to make sure that the user had an opportunity to prevent or correct an error. So, and this is going to be part of the sense making and good inputs to this broader work that Sandy talked about. Is we try to work with industry to come up with more common standards and approaches. Did you want to say something, Damien?
Is that the human correcting or the agent?
I think that should be a topic for a breakout table. And so the question was, does it have to be a human or could it be an agent correcting it? And I think that's an issue. The way you framed it, I think, is needs more scrutiny and statutory analysis. It needs to be a human that was provided the opportunity. And could they have had an agent operating on their behalf to do error handling? Maybe. Which all raises the question, what the hell are agents? How many people here think you have a solid, definitive answer to this question? Just a show of hands. Okay, 2. Good. So a lot of people secretly think they do, but they don't have their hands up, and that's okay. There was just an article out a few days ago from TechCrunch titled, "No one knows what the hell an agent is." So let's just start from that. And in this article, it's really great. They go through OpenAI's definition, Anthropic's definition, Salesforce's definition, various research labs' definitions. They're all kind of different. They kind of look at different aspects of it. There's some conflicts. Any one of these entities and other entities' definitions shift from time to time. So we're in this period of, we're in an early period in terms of broad sense making. I'll just say one thing on this before we dive deeper, because I do think definitions matter. The thing I want to say is they don't matter today. Okay, we do not, in fact, we need to not that we don't need a definition, we need to not spend a second all agreeing on a definition of agents right now. What we need to do instead is just define it. Like if you're implementing these things in an organization or providing a product or using it, have a definition for your organization, go through that work and then use it and change it. Have a definition for the length of time of a conversation. But we don't all have to agree yet, and there's different things that fall in the umbrella, and treat it like GAAP, generally accepted accounting principles. The main point of almost ideological definite, they'll die on that hill from people that use generally accepted accounting principles is you could depreciate assets this way and they can do it that way. You could realize revenue on this way and they could do it that way. Your fiscal year can start in March and they can start in January. But whatever you decide, damn well better use it consistently across your enterprise all the way, or you're going to be in big trouble. So just treat it like GAAP, come up with your definition and apply it consistently. Okay, so enough of that. So here's what, so I'm going to give you some basic ideas that I think will not steer you wrong about some of the characteristics of these AI agents, okay? In the old world, as I foreshadowed, we had deterministic predefined outputs with these agents. Okay. So like we certainly had agents that could conduct automated workflows, complex ones that were multiple steps with a lot of if-thens and logic trees. And high frequency trading is a great example of that. And some procurement systems I worked on, supply chain, like payment systems were very complex. If you did business process reengineering, it covered like most of this wall with all of the different, swim lane diagrams. The new world is different. In one way it's different is that we call it complexity is a good concept for this. So with complex systems, you can get this emergent behavior where you can't necessarily predict what will come out at the end. And this is one good way to think about what happens with these transformer models, the variability, especially when the temperature is higher. They're not applying a specific if-then rule. They're more doing some pattern recognition and some kind of reasoning. And that makes them a particularly good fit for a lot of things, especially things where they're looking at novel situations where we don't, like with the procurement and payment and high frequency trading and other stuff, we knew all of the conditions at once. We had tightly defined domains where all the inputs and all the conditions and all the networks and all the variables could be defined. In the open web, not so much. So one of the things you can get when we control and configure these systems well is we can now do a great deal more things with them that were always out of reach before with the old systems. That depends on how performant they are, how high quality they are, how if they do better or not. But the truth is they do better. These LLMs can be harnessed within program logic and by giving memory and some tools and some other things, which are technically how these agents are constructed. You can sort of use the thinking part, the cyber cognition part to have very complex goals and to adapt to complex environments where we didn't know everything we were going to see up front. When you're going to a new website or the API is changed that you're integrating with, or some other funny things like that, or they made you an offer that you didn't expect, or something like that. They can reason about that. They can adapt, and then they can they can choose appropriate actions, and they can execute it independently, which is that part of UIDA I was showing you. They can take independent action without human review or approval. So these are some of the characteristics at a super high level of like, what am I talking about when I say AI, like the new kind of AI agents, like this LLM-based AI agents. Let me go a little bit more specific now. That was all kind of abstract. Here's some very specific examples in different categories. One of them is coding agents. So there's Devin, there's a lot of these other coders like Cursor here, Replit agents and some others. These are examples of these agents where you can give it a goal and it will go and sort of decide what does that goal mean, what sort of tools or language do I want to use to make it, what libraries do I need, how do I log, and they can start iteratively creating the program for you. Very interesting. So that's like a domain where people are getting there's a lot of investment, there's a lot of good results from agents for coding software. Another domain, another different category of agents I'd call application specific. So one thing people are doing great stuff with is, can you have some of these agent systems use a browser so they can browse the web, like HTTP with HTML, and JavaScript, and CSS. And you can. So OpenAI has something called Operator that does that. And you give it a goal, and it goes and it creates a virtual browser, and it goes to these different websites, does search. You can kind of figure out where to put the virtual mouse and what to click on, and like what's a pull-down menu. Pretty good. And Claude has something called computer use. So like there's a whole category now of things that just kind of do that. So I call that like an application-specific type of agent. How about the legal domain? Oh, heck yes. So we have agents in the legal domain. It's not prevalent yet, but they're happening. So on the left here, we have Spellbook, which is a kind of a contract review platform. And they've got these teams of agents that will go and sort of like, kind of like create a plan for how to do the contract review or how to do the extraction or how to do whatever your review is. And then they start executing the plan and Then they have these little evaluation agents, which I'll come back to see, like, is this a good answer? Is it in alignment with what the user originally asked? And if it's bad enough, they'll not only go back and run it again, but they may change the plan and then run it again. Adaptive, right? These are examples of some of these words I was using earlier, and they're quite good. On the right, we have something even more exotic. My friend John May, who's another Codex affiliate, has a company called norm.ai. They're doing regulatory compliance, and they've been very successful. They've got some great industry clients. They've had great rounds of funding, and those agents are asking other questions. Not is this contract, review red line thing happening, but more like when this employee is doing this sort of thing or making that kind of assertion to a customer or to a service provider, how does that fit with our regulatory compliance? And so the inputs and the context there might be the stuff that a compliance officer would train the employees on. And it can sort of do some judgments, and it can help the user at certain points, or it could raise a red flag for review. It's very interesting, an agentic process for regulatory compliance, legal domain. Now, so we can talk about all of this stuff, and we will, depending on what's interesting to you in the topics and the tables later. But the anchor scenario I want to talk about is transactions. So you have an agent, you want it to go and shop for you, find the right thing that you would want, and like actually make the purchase, like the whole life cycle of shopping. This is a big use case. There's other transactions that you can look at as well. This is like a whole sub-industry within agents right now. Perplexity was the first to market with something called Buy with Pro, Perplexity Pro, where they have a human in the loop. So after you say that sort of thing you're looking for, it kind of gives you 10 answers, like a little card and like the price and the reviews, and then you could click one and click Buy with Pro, and it will go and put in the shopping cart, like do all the stuff, use your bill to address, your ship to address, and it shows up at your door. I've used it, it worked. Another one is Amazon. Just a few days ago, Consumer Reports was telling me, I didn't hear it, but I found it later. There's now something called Buy From Me from Amazon. She's doing the same thing. Amazon's a particularly good fit for this. They already have a marketplace, they have Alexa. So this is one kind of agent. Notice that with these agents, actually, I would just say, notice with these agents, think back to what Sandy said, when he said, what are the kind of roles and relationships of the people running the agents with respect to the consumer? Are they fiduciaries? Like, do they have the best interest of the consumer solely at heart when they're shopping for you? Or do they have someone else's interest at heart, like their partners or their advertisers, for example? There's nothing wrong at all with it. It's perfectly good. If I was at Amazon or Perplexity, I would totally be rolling these types of products out, which has a critical role within the ecology and the economy in our market. But it's not the only way to do an agent. We can also do agents that are loyal to individuals. And that could be useful sometimes. Let me just do a little more level setting. So the biggest, like the crucible for a transaction is payments, okay? That's where the rubber hits the road. Like money has changed hands. Like that's where the risk of loss shifts, like a whole bunch of things change at the point that when money changes hands. She used to work at Stripe and everything. So Stripe had rolled out not long ago, the Stripe Agent API, okay? And it's basically an extension of their existing payments API. And it lets you do some cool stuff, like use the Stripe Payments API to allocate a certain amount of funding to an agent so it can go and purchase things for you. You can do like limits on it, and you can set some other authorizations. You can also put a meter on an agent. So let's say your business is, I'm selling agents, and I want them to charge by the minute, or I want them to charge by the deliverable. So you can do this really cool stuff with the Stripe Agent Payments API. This is all part of commerce, I'd say, in transactions. So I just want to really stress, this had been science fiction almost my entire life. This is like nonfiction, okay? This is now. We are there, it's happening. Which is great for law, because in law, we can only go so far being hypothetical about things. At some point, you have to apply the law to facts in order to get a legal result about what the outcome will be. We now have the emergence of facts. And more to the point, we can build facts that are more to our liking. by doing the type of prototyping Sandy was talking about. Speaking of which, now let's come back to that question I raised, which is what are these roles and relationships? I call this triangle the iron triangle. So one of the areas of law we might want to look at isn't just contract law, but it's agency. You know, the good thing about agency law with principals and agents and third parties is we're already using the word agent. Now, the technology is not a legal agent now. Like you can't, like your toaster can't be an agent. You can't have like an inert piece of software have a legal role. And there's a lot of good reasons for that. Like they can't be accountable, like they can't sue and be sued, like they can't, necessarily, like it's a lot of the fundamental assumptions that make agency law work don't apply to software yet, at least. But what you can do, if you look at the lower left corner, an agentic system, and if we just say for 99% of the time, like people won't be building agent systems for themselves like I do. We'll be going to a company of some kind or a nonprofit who will provide us an agent system and we'll use it to do something for us. That means we have a legal part. It's the agent provider. And so when you have the agent technology and you're a user getting it from the agent provider, between the two of them, we can call that an agent system that is like the legal entity that's selling you the agent, and then the agent itself, which is technology. Hey, we can apply agency law now. And it goes to the legal entity that's providing me the agent. And then things start to look really interesting. Consumer Reports likes this because they're pro-consumer and they want to have agents used in a way that can also represent the best interests of consumers, can advocate for consumers' interests, can strike the best bargain for consumers, can avoid traps for the unwary. Maybe you can read some legal terms that we'll hear more about soon in Diana's talk, and some other really interesting things. Again, this is not the only business model. There's other business models that are completely legit. This is just a very interesting one that we want to make sure we explore, and we actually think might be on its own merit, should be part of the ecology of options that people have. So you could have a fiduciary duty, which means a duty of loyalty by the agent provider with the agent system back to the principal, who's the user, principal agent. And now all of a sudden, when there's questions about like kickbacks from the partner that the agent has, or, are they really optimizing? Are they in alignment with the interests of the user? It all goes, we have like hundreds of years of agency law that help us immediately get to the bottom of that. Like we know you shouldn't be taking kickbacks from the third party if you're an agent. That's called illegal, and everyone knows the rights and obligations, responsibilities and the remedies. So we'll get more into that later, but this is one of the threads we want to explore with Consumer Reports and with the companies as we go forward. Another big thing, I've been throwing around this word authorization. Where's Tobin? I think I saw him. Yeah, there he is. So we're going to hear some mind-blowing stuff from one of Sandy's PhD students on authenticated delegation of authority to authorized agents. Really interesting when you think about that. We should have something like that somehow. And there's a paper that thanks again for letting me be a co-author. I didn't think of this, kind of came in later and helped write some of the legal stuff with Robert and others, but this idea is really fresh. It's good. It's like we can apply OAuth 2 and OpenID Connect, sort of existing widely deployed technologies for authorizing this electronic agent to do stuff on our behalf. It's really interesting conversation starter to get us into how do we delegate authority. When I hear delegate authority, I think it's technical, but I think it's like, I don't know what, 60, 70, 80% legal. Delegate authority. That's like a very legal concept. So we have a place at this table too. We're going to hear about that when Tobin speaks. Did someone say something? Are you going to cover that a little bit, Tobin? Okay, so we're going to cover that when Tobin speaks. And then also we can have breakout table, because I think that right there is like, like a solid, 3 or 4 12-hour meetings to dig into. The answer is yes and no. It's like unsatisfactory, but we can fix it. It's a great question. There's legislative hearings, by the way. We've had 2 in Wyoming, which is a very forward-looking state for reforming law to support and reflect new technologies. We've had 2 specifically on AI agents, and they're looking at UEDA and possible ways to fill the gap and make sure that we have predictable legal results when people use AI agents. They actually are coming at this from a positive perspective. We want to support this, but we want to support the safe deployment of it. They're not starting from AI safety. We need safety, but it's not starting from existential dread. It's starting from how do we transform the economy and have like a more vibrant marketplace that works better for everybody. These are good questions. The next hearing is May 15th. I'm going to be presenting. And if anyone's interested in legislative reforms to continue to support and reflect AI agents and their emergence with some new wrinkles, talk to me. There's new good laws that we can make. And finally, I just want to say, I don't want to scare you too much, but there's a broader context here, which is, so I've been talking about like kind of cool stuff, but it's still a little bit limited, like kind of like autonomous defined workflows and stuff. There's like a lot bigger implications now of these AI agents. Like last year, Sakana Labs in Japan published something called AI Scientist, and with an open source GitHub repo. And if you look at these swim lanes here on the left, they had teams of agents that would do ideation of new possible research ideas. Then they would go and check all the research papers to see which ones were novel, things like that. They would kind of rate and rank them to see which ones were worth doing down here. And then the top few would go to the next thing where they would then have another team of agents say, how would we experiment with this idea? And then some of them, they couldn't think of something, but few of them, and they can come up with a lot of ideas. So a few of them is enough. They were like, oh, well, we could sort of get this data from over here and that data from over there. And we could put it into like SciPy and NumPy, and we could run this regression, or we do different stuff and get some answers. We could test our hypothesis. And then they would build the code using those coding agents I talked about. So teams of coding agents, they would then load the data and get some results. And then they would do the experiment. And then some of those would then be uninteresting results, but some of them, because they start with a lot of ideation that LLMs can do, would be very interesting results. They then have templates for research papers. And then they have writing agents. LLMs are good at writing, okay? Real good at writing. And they sort of like pass forward as variables. Here's what we did. Here's our methodology. Here's the results we got. Here's some other stuff. And they would write the paper, review it, and then they could publish it. I think they didn't publish them directly, but you could then add one last API to like publish it somewhere. This is what I would call a full life cycle of a deep process, something closer to what you would expect employees to do, like several employees or grad students at a research lab, for example. Okay, I hope I have your attention now, because guess what's happening? Oh, and sorry, and there's more general purpose agents. Manus just dropped. I've been building a system called Agento. So I know firsthand that you can do these, not just research, but you can do this for all kinds of ideation, like a new product, a new service, a new type of legal argument. Like you can ideate all sorts of stuff and sort of start to, in an autonomous way, like rate and rank the ideas, find some good ones, and then start to build it out. And you can do it a lot and sometimes get some really good answers at the end. What does this mean? Well, OpenAI is reported to be planning to charge $20,000 a month for specialized agents that are capable of doing PhD level research, or $10,000 a month for software development, or $2,000 a month for high income knowledge work. Guess where lawyers fit, by the way? We're at the bottom of that scale. So like, as we walk around thinking that we're like, completely irreplaceable, unreplaceable, like look at the numbers. And then Salesforce has got Agentforce, which is also like labor, right? They're putting these agents together to do this types of functions and capabilities that you would get from people that you hire, okay? Goldman Sachs and World Economic Forum are predicting significant transformation, some disruptions, but also some great new possibilities in the labor market. What does this mean for law, though? Like I just said, that sort of snarky comment about, are we irreplaceable or replaceable? And, we all think that we can't be replaced. And yet, just a few days ago, A&O, Alan Overy, and I guess chairman, whoever that is, they merged. So it's AOS now, huge, huge global law firm, now has a deal with Harvey, and it's a strategic partnership. And you know what they're getting? Specialized legal agents that do much deeper workflows than what I showed you in the spell book, and a lot more of them. And so it's not the super top end, like most senior partner thing, but it's like the great middle. It's not the deepest commodity stuff that just paralegals do. That's kind of already almost gone, but it's that middle stuff that kind of takes like, mid-level associates to hire to kind of think things through over time. It's doing that stuff across a bunch of different domains. It's higher value tasks, there's efficiency gains. And what that means is a transformation of the business model itself for law. And interestingly, the way that they're going to be dealing with this is A&O has apparently a license agreement, according to Artificial Lawyer out of the UK, where they're going to be reselling this capability even in a more of a refined way to other law firms. And not long before people start replicating this. Harvey is not the only game in town that knows how to do a good agent. Arguably, they're not near the best. They're good and they have first mover advantage. I'm saying nothing against them, but it's a big economy with some really talented people out there. And so we're seeing a harbinger now of some things, and clients, in-house counsel will have access to this, which will impact who's even going to pay the law firms when they're doing this. And what if businesses themselves are able to start doing it and reduce in-house counsel? So there's going to be like a whole new kind of way that we look at the provision of what the job of a lawyer is, and how do we work with agents, and how do we, it's really important. How do we evaluate them? How do we know if these things, when they're operating autonomously, did a good job? Like, who's watching the watcher? And what units of measure are we using for legal work? It's already hard enough. Well, Harvey does it by evaluating its agents against human lawyers doing exactly the same task. And they're coming out well, which is why they have these rich deals. So they have succeeded. That other people can succeed too. I think I've succeeded in my narrow domains where I've done stuff. So this is very doable. Like, the starting gun has hit. But how do we evaluate them? That's one way to evaluate them. There's other ways to do evals as well. I'll leave you with this thought. The most important thing, as soon as you've got a good idea for how to do these agents and how to make them conduct transactions, how to do fiduciary duties, how to get the best price, how to do contract review, this right after arguably the same time you're thinking about and prototyping your agent system, come up with your evals at the same time. When I work with clients, I do evals before we write a line of code. I ask, how would I know if this succeeded? What would be the expected output? Kind of have a whole column in spreadsheets for that. And then we have the inputs. And then we write the code and we see how it's doing. We'll change the evals as we learn more. But having these evals give us an objective measure of performance and whether it's succeeding or not. So we're not vibe coding completely. We actually have good measures. And for law, that's even more important. There's some legal evals. Vals just did their big Flair legal eval report. Some of you may have seen. There's Galileo has a whole how to evaluate agents thing, including the legal domain. And the one that I'm really interested in, thanks to Megan and their legal hackathon on Sunday, I met the team from Scorecard at last, and they have an open source effort to have standard benchmarks and evals for agents, specifically LLM agents, get this, in the legal domain. So an open resource with GitHub repo, convening, and open source so we can start to share these evals. I'm not saying that's the only way to do it, but like, I like what I heard. Like, this is the kind of thing that we're doing this open, neutral convening about here at Stanford, evals. Okay, so now we are at the point where I've hopefully enlightened you and scared you a little bit, and kind of warmed you up to the topic of what do we mean in the first place by AI agents for law. And so now you're ready to receive the wisdom and the enlightenment of Diana Stern, who's like the lawyer's lawyer, in my view. Come on up. And thank you. And I'm very proud to say that she's my friend. And we've also collaborated successfully on a 3-part blog series that led up to this workshop. that it started to explore some of the issues, options, and opportunities for AI agents in law with transactions. And to tell it all about it is the lawyer herself, Diana Stern.
Yeah.
My
Thank you.
favorite.
Oh, yes. Thank you so much, Dazza, for that introduction. And you inspired so many ideas in my mind. I want to tangent on all of them, but I will only allow myself one, which is recently a brilliant copyright lawyer friend of mine said, how are we going to evaluate the value of human work in this new AI world? And at the time, which was a month ago, maybe, I was kind of like, it'll be emergent. We'll see what happens. And now I'm like, well, seems like it's probably about time for that. But anyways, so my name is Diana Stern. As Dazza mentioned, I'm a lawyer. I'm currently Deputy General Counsel at Protocol Labs. We are an innovation network that is driving breakthroughs in computing from blockchain to biotech. I'm also special counsel at a law firm called DLX. We specialize in fintech and crypto and other cutting edge areas where I do product counseling, corporate and regulatory law. Before that, I was GC of a crypto company and briefly also the CEO, and that company was acquired. And before that, I was at Stripe where I did crypto and also some other kind of risk management things and learned a lot about payments. And so
Before
before that, I was in big law, yes. And I was actually at a firm where I helped to design smart contracts and automation that would automatically execute SOWs. And I remember trying to talk to the firm about doing a licensing model, which I think this was 2018. It's maybe a little bit too early. Okay. But I give them a lot of credit for being forward thinking enough to go there. So I was curious who all is in this audience, and I will give a couple categories, and I'm guessing there's some multidisciplinary folks, so feel free to raise your hand for multiple if it applies. But how many people are founders or builders? Oh, love that. Okay, how many are practicing lawyers? Okay, cool. How many are law students? Yay. Okay, and then anything else I didn't name, like maybe executives or something? Okay, all right, all right, cool. Technologists, yes, technologists. Okay, oh, amazing, yes, okay, so builder technologists, all right, cool. Yeah, so as Dazza was saying, we've entered the era where AI isn't just answering our questions, it's really engaging in transactions. And specifically, I want to talk about transactional AI agents that Dazza talked about, which is really flourishing into a whole new kind of subgroup, as he called it, of AI agents. And when Dazza and I started this research, which was maybe like 9 months ago or so now, it was really hard because we were both trying to project where's the law going to go and how are these things going to be built? And it was just so abstract because there wasn't a lot of examples yet. There was like a couple of startups trying to do it, but it was just really not clear. And then all of a sudden, recently, over the last few months, we've seen iterations like Perplexity Pro, which has anybody used that to buy anything? Okay, cool. Yeah, I used it and it worked very well. I'll get into a little bit more about their model in a bit. So today I want to cover 3 different areas, and this is kind of going to expand on a couple points from what Dazza and also what Sandy talked about, but a little bit more from the builder technologist in-house counsel perspective. So one is what I'll call the agency dilemma. Who is responsible when AI agents are taking actions like making purchases? What happens when they make mistakes, and some proactive solutions, which is legal hacks, which is probably a favorite of many folks in this room. And all of this is still very much being figured out. So I definitely welcome ideas as we're kind of figuring out how things are going to land in this space. Okay. So one of the common misconceptions is that with AI agents, it's the agent who is liable for things that he's doing. But the agent is software, right? And as Dazza mentioned, we're not yet at the point where software itself can be liable. So a lot of times it's the company that's providing that software. And that's just a really important starting point to not confuse AI agent, the software, with the agent for legal purposes. So one of there's kind of 3 potential legal frameworks that I think you can use when you're developing an AI agent sort of system for end users who are making transactions with your AI agent. So one is principal-agent relationship. And as both Sandy and Dazza mentioned, that's where you would have fiduciary duties coming in. There would actually be a legal agent. So like if anyone here has bought a house, you had an agent who was your fiduciary, there was an agreement laying everything out. That's a very clear form of agent. So the software company providing the AI agent service could act as the legal agent for the user, which would bring along likely more trust, but also the responsibility of fiduciary duties. Note that agency can also be implied based on behavior or conduct, or it can come from apparent authority. So maybe how this AI agent represents itself in the world, if it's going on a website trying to buy a video console and saying like, oh yeah, this is the person buying it, and the website thinks like, oh yeah, okay, this person is buying this thing, and it's really a software agent that's representing itself as that person. Maybe that's enough to establish agency, which is why it's important to think about upfront in designing your system, which of these models you want to be using, and be really clear about that both in your terms and in sort of the overall design. By the way, this isn't really actually legal advice, more like general food for thought, but I'm happy to talk about actual legal advice after if anyone would like. Okay, so that's the first model is agency. The second one on the other side of the spectrum is the pure infrastructure play. So this is basically saying that the AI agent is merely providing the access, the infra, and the users taking the actions themselves. So this is like you're on your own, bud. Like we're just showing you the website. This is actually what Perplexity does. I hope they wouldn't be offended by this call out, because I mean, from a business perspective, it makes sense. But I looked at their terms and they use a lot of language like all purchases of any products using ProShop are from the merchant directly, and we're not a party to those transactions. We have no responsibility to you. There's even a release in there. So this is like the opposite end of the spectrum from agents. There's like a more niche one, which I know we have one fantastic litigator, case law oriented person in the room who maybe you have some insight on this. But I think there might be a third approach where the AI agent is an independent contractor. Yeah, okay, thank you. Case law is not really my comfort zone. I'm not a litigator, but I did dive in, and it seems like not as many companies are using that, but I do think it's an interesting in between where you say like, you're delegating these services to us and we're going to do those things. And it doesn't have the heaviness or the trust of the legal agent model, but not so on your own as the pure infra model. So yes, the AI agent company would be the independent contractor to the user. So like, let's do a variation Perplexity. I would be hiring them almost like the way you hire a normal assistant is like an independent contractor relationship. And so it doesn't, yeah, that's kind of the Perplexity would be my independent contractor for the purpose of that transaction. Yeah. Yes, good point. Yeah. And that's where you can also flesh out in the terms, or maybe you could even have something where it's like, what do you want us to do? And you have a sort of computational way of creating terms based on what the user has input in the beginning. I like that. Okay. All right. So I want to do a little interactive moment here. I'm curious, taking the position of an AI agent service provider, which framework would you prefer? Thinking about the trade-offs between higher liability, but more trust, or lower liability and less trust. How many people would do the legal agent approach? From the company, if you are providing the AI agent service, how many would provide the agent? Yes. Yes, please.
Although on the surface, it looks like a bad deal, you have more operations, more liability. I think we distinguish people, that consumers would go to trust, and get working. I think I would use this, like you started using the AI agent provider.
Yeah, yeah, okay, cool. Yes. Yep. Oh, I'll come to you in a second, and that first we'll go with the technologists here, and then we'll go over here.
So I would very much lean toward the security models in all this. My big concern is that the fiduciary models currently are not secure, and especially
Okay, that's interesting, yeah. So wanting to go fiduciary, but lack of clarity causing hesitation. Yes.
Yeah, sorry, I was just commenting that I think it's one of the use cases. There may be certain things where you want to have an fiduciary, others where you would want to see the identification with the action purposefully and also liability. But as you were talking about, again,
Yeah. Okay, we'll do one more, and then I want to do the rest of the poll. Yeah.
also understand
Mhm.
you don't want to get into a fiduciary.
Right, yeah, so maybe growing into taking on more liability. There's a dynamic model. There's wanting more clarity. Okay, so we didn't have a lot of votes for the legal agent perspective. What about the independent contractor perspective? Again, if you are the AI agent service provider, would you want to be the independent contractor to your user, which is sort of the in-between approach?
Yeah, I come from Europe, and in Europe, this concept of agency is different in the US than in Europe. But
Okay.
I think it's in Europe.
Right, right. But that's what the user would be able to do with you as the independent contractor.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but it would be a more familiar relationship essentially is what you're saying. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. And then how many people for the pure info, or did you have a comment on the independent contractor front over in the? Totally. Yeah, I was actually just working on a trust agreement where there was a provision that said no, no duty. Every time it says in your sole discretion, there shall be no duty attached. And by the time I finished reading the agreement, I realized there was actually no fiduciary duties left. Yes. And then finally, who would, and I won't take comments for this just in the interest of time, but just who would choose the pure infrastructure model? That's the sort of, the user is just, we're just providing pure technological infrastructure. The user is taking all the actions themselves. We're not, okay, we got a couple for that.
We're not liable.
Right, which, to this gentleman's point, you can include liability everywhere, but I think it's harder to work around the defaults when you start from the extreme taking on a lot. Okay, and then and we won't take comments on this part, but I just kind of as a experiment, if you are the user of an AI agent system, how many people would use an AI agent system that was a legal agent? Who would prefer that system? Okay. Who would go with the independent contractor style? So sometimes depending on what it is. Okay. And who would do the pure technical infra? Okay. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I know. I didn't realize this when I was first using it. I was just like trying to buy a book for my grandma, and then I realized after what it was. But I actually think, and so it's interesting, this poll didn't show it as much as I expected. So that's a good testing of my hypothesis. But I thought that the user side would show demand for the agent model, but maybe we're still a little early. And I also think your point around it depends what it is really critical, right? Because if we're just doing things that don't really matter that much, you're just buying something for $5, maybe you don't care. Maybe you're fine with the less service fees, do it for free, you're just the technical infra. Okay. Right. So the comment is about who I would want to know, where is the money being made? And yeah, that's a really good point. What kind of disclosure should these things have? A little outside of what I was thinking about, but that's a good call out for something to evaluate, which we'll actually get into the last part of this talk, which how much more time?
Would there be an objection to the speaker going to say 40, 20, and then we have like 40 minutes discussion? Hearing no objection, you have another 3.5 minutes.
Wait, really?
Or 5 minutes.
5 minutes. Okay, 5 minutes. 5 minutes. Okay. So I'm going to skip a whole thing about UITA. I'm sorry, Dazza. You did a good job laying it out. And I'm just going to jump to the legal hacks. So let me just think if there's any context that I should. Okay, that's fine. Sometimes AI agents make mistakes. There's some things in the law that might help us with that we could lean on. You could think about in designing your AI agent, but I don't have time to talk about it right now. So we're going to, it's okay. We're going to jump into legal hacks, which are innovative strategies to embed legal safeguards directly into AI agent systems. And there's a couple, and again, you can read about all of this in the blog posts that Dazza and I wrote for CodeX. But there's a couple that I want to highlight that we identified. One was using zero knowledge proofs for privacy protection. Are folks in here familiar with zero knowledge proofs? Okay, it's basically a way of showing somebody that you know something without showing them what you know. So it's really helpful, especially when AI agents are talking to each other, to minimize data sharing, but still allow them to do what they need to do. The other was specialized insurance for AI agent transactions. I think this could be a big area for insurance companies and something to look into if you're building these things. And then the one I really wanted to talk with you guys about is having machine readable terms of service that eventually potentially evolve into some sort of standardization. So right now, a lot of companies are putting their websites into the LLMS.txt specification, which basically means they're creating a plain language version of their website so that AI agents can have an easier time interacting with it. Now, imagine if you could do that with terms of service. So when we were talking about our preferences from a user perspective, maybe this kind of transaction, I want an agent that does things as my legal agent. Maybe for this kind of transaction, I don't really care. You could potentially have a world where you set your preferences with perhaps a specialized AI agent, and you say, it could be very detailed in terms of service. Like, I'm a content creator, and I don't want to use content creation platforms that claim ownership over my IP. And you could have an agent that goes and reads the terms of service on the other sites or the other AI agents that you're using. And I think this is really could be a watershed moment, and maybe I'm an optimist here, but for lawyers in the law, because the way the internet has evolved so far, I mean, when is the last time someone read a terms of service that was for something you were using? Right? I mean, I just did it for this presentation for Flexi, but I really don't normally otherwise. But doesn't really seem like where we wanted to end up, right? Like we're kind of, there's just like these piles of information in there and it's really not accessible. What if we could create a better UI for legal agreements with AI agents and say, you know, these are the sites I want to interact with, these are the sites I don't want to interact with, and it reads the terms for you. So I want to ask you guys whether you think, like you could don't shop on sites that have less than a 30-day return policy. Something like that. So I want to ask you guys, do you find this compelling? I promise I won't be offended either way. Do you find it compelling or not? Why or why not? Do you think it's realistic? Yes.
Yes, we checked this 10+ years ago, and that it required essentially the stock to be able to agree to it, and that
Okay, that's a great, I love when like a change circumstance allows a new possibility. Okay. Was there anybody else want to weigh in on this one?
So, are you talking about having a machine?
Yes. Machine readable terms of service that then through your AI agent is like, you know, oh, yeah.
Okay, so you have a machine readable terms of service.
Yes.
In those districts, say, on scrupulous, one thing in the machine readable, which is
So, yeah, you would probably just have a clause saying which supersedes the other. And maybe this is what you incorporate into your agent of like human error, the error and mistake stuff kind of resolves mistakes. Yeah,
and just
yeah,
because they won't have
yeah, yeah.
and then translate. You're gonna have issues with
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great call. And that's the thing I think is possibly achievable today if we just extend llms.txt to terms of service pages and do them in plain language. Or marking the pages. Yes, I'll take one more comment and then any question, maybe a question or two on.
I just want to make sure, I mean, there's definitely safety issues here.
Mhm.
So we also need
Yeah.
I'll make a comment. Two quick things. One, this LLMS is interesting because it's when people set them up on the sites, it usually the authoritative source is whatever's on the website, and then it just creates not this crazy like React, like impossible to parse HTML version, but it just creates like a pure text version. So it's sourced from the same material, not different. And it's possible to avoid, I think it's easier to avoid prompt injection kind of poisoning attacks with a plain text document than it is when things are hidden in the DOM on the website. So it may be better in some ways. But the other thing is in terms of future, like if your excellent idea catches on, and the thing about these terms and conditions is if it's in human language, it's machine readable by LLMs in a certain way.
Yeah.
And the thing that's great about that is if you look at where it logically should end up, 15 years ago or so, the Securities and Exchange Commission said after Enron, when you're doing your SEC filings, we want you to do it in machine readable text using XML, XBRL, so that you can't play the shell game of like, footnote 17 in this PDF is actually dependent on that thing. It's really hard to read. It's just, you can write algorithms to quickly figure stuff out. In the rule, they said the authoritative version is the XML version, it's the plain text version. And if what you showed other people's different, too bad for you. And that made a lot of sense. That was after a lot of debate. You look at Air Canada, they were one of the early liability cases for an agent. Somebody used their chat bot to figure out what the return policy was or something, and it told them one thing, that you're not eligible. And then the guy took them to court saying like that was out of sync with your actual rules, and he won. And the judge said, like, detrimental reliance on what the company told you through, how are they supposed to know which one is the right one to listen to? So I think that, the way that the law is applied and practiced in common law nations finds the fair result, and the fair result favors what Diana is saying.
Thank you. That was awesome. I feel like that was a great mic drop on the, yeah. A last question on anything that I covered, anything that could be clarified, any questions? I'll also be around after. Okay, thank you everyone so much. Really appreciate it.
You're so good. He's so great. Okay. How are we going to, you're going to screen share? I'm screen sharing. I think like that. Can you maximize the screen? So except the entire.
How do I do it?
I just do the.
Yeah, make the
thing.
exactly. Like make this the biggest.
This one?
Yeah, the entire Zoom.
Okay. Boop.
Yeah.
Cool. Hey, everybody. Boop.
So I'm a litigator, and I like to red light, so I'm going to say 27 minutes on the clock. As soon as this goes off, I'm done. So buckle up. Every time I'm in your position, I think last night I was in your position. So I go where 2002, and I litigated for the future.
Oh, actually, can you come here and use this one? They can't hear you.
Okay.
Sorry.
Oh, good.
I'll grab this.
Yeah. So I left that cool job to do another cool job in cybersecurity, where the biggest thing I did was that Facebook hired me and my company to investigate Cambridge Analytica. So I spent a year of my life on Facebook's campus down the street at Palo Alto, Monday through Friday, working with Facebook's data scientists and my former FBI, CIA, NSA people that worked with me to figure out how bad guys use Facebook data. I did that 57 weeks in a row, and the stuff that we do on Monday would make the New York Times and the Times of London by Friday. These days, my day job is with VLEX. We have a billion legal documents, cases, statutes, regulations, motions, briefs, pleadings, orders. And my job is maybe the best job on the planet, where I get to do data science on those billion legal documents and then run large language models across them. I also, for 5 years, helped lead the Sally Alliance and Folio, where it's a legal data standard being used by Thomson Reuters, LexisNexis, iManage, NetDocuments. It's 18,000 data sets of everything that matters to the law, which is transactional and litigation. But let's talk about agents. Legal LLMs are things that matter. That is the, large, if coding data sets were built on code, they code better. And it turns out that what if you train on the law? Will it be able to do law better? Will agents be able to work on the law better? Because the agents, GPT-4 was built on some of the grossest parts of the internet, that is Reddit and Twitter, et cetera. But what if it were actually on some of the, what if all the large language model knew was cases, statutes, and regulations? How many more legal tasks can these legal agents do? And maybe, Mike Bomarito and Dan Katz, I don't know if Dan is in the audience, he's in the other room, but he said that some of the things that they got wrong in the bar exam, they beat 90% of humans on the bar exam, but one of the things they got wrong is the rule against perpetuities. That's something that humans get wrong. But what if the large language model knows all of the rule against perpetuities for all the states with a foundational model? Maybe the agents will be able to do a lot more. So maybe we need to align the agents. And Sam Altman says we need to align with human values. And my response to him is, Sam, we've had that for about 800 years. It's called the law. That's the best way that we've said that we can align with human values, because your human values are different than my human values. How do we agree with those human values? The law, cases, statutes, and regs. But the question is, whose values do we align with? Because I have a friend who works for a large, massive company whose name you know that I can't say. Her job is to take down objectionable material. And in Germany, that objectionable material is Nazi, because under German law, you have to take down that Nazi content. But under Texas law, under Texas values, you have to keep that up. So she said, whose values do I follow? Do I follow German values, or do I follow Texas values? Because I can't follow both values. I can't follow both laws. I need to choose one or the other. So the real question is, whose human values do we align with as agentic works? But what if you could? What if you could align the LLM averaging of all the worldwide law? And we at VLEX have 100 countries data. That is, we have data from the EU, we have data from France, Spain, we have EU. What if you could be able to say, here, agent, is the least worst option. Here are the penalties under German law, and here are the penalties under US law, Texas law, which is the least worst option to do. And maybe if you have that legal LLM that's actually parsing it to be able to say, this is the alignment with most of the countries and the largest populations, this is the way the agents can go about and do the work of the world to align with those human values. Because if you have an autonomous agent that says, go out, create a business plan, create a product, create a bank account, bring in some money, and if you have any questions, let me know. Think about all the bad things that can happen. Lots of bad things can happen. Like think of it, all the laws that can be broken, all the German laws, all the Texas laws. There are lots of bad things that can happen. But what if in the alternative, you say, hey, agent, before you do any task, consult the legal oracle. That is, consult Texas law and German law and 100 countries worldwide and pick the least worst option. And if there's a threshold above X%, contact a human so the human can give a thumbs up or a thumbs down and the human will do. That's the way that we can align with human values, that is human laws, to be able to pick the least worst option. So that's what CLEM is, KL3M. Dan Katz, who is around here, he and Mike Bomarito built a foundational model, and all it knows is cases, statutes, regulations, rules. They ingested the entire .gov website. Not only does it know the law, it's also copyright free. That is, it's the first fairly trained foundational model. And it's all free and it's all open source. Data is oil. We've known that for a bunch of years. And maybe you need this big data oil field to do your agentic work. So with agentic work, of course, Danny Kahneman, who sadly passed away, talked about system 1 and system 2 thinking. System 1 is what foundational models have been in the past, where it's just a knee-jerk reaction. And system 2 is maybe the thinking models, to be able to think more and determine more reliably on the right-hand side. So as we think about the system 1 and system 2 thinking, what are these agents going to be doing? And when you think about any task, we'll think in this context of legal tasks. There are very common tasks, and then there's a long tail of less common, less known tasks. So what if you were to put a line between the known and the common things and separate those from the unknown and uncommon things? And on the left-hand side, just code up, hard code, all of the known and common things that are the most common legal tasks for litigation or the most common legal tasks for transactional work. These are the known and common things, and just let the large language model figure out the unknown and uncommon thing, figure out the long tail in this way. So the benefit of that is that, the long tail, we think about the right-hand side as just the robots, but think about how the robots run amok. They go down rabbit holes and they do bad things, right? And it's probabilistic rather than deterministic. So don't we want to say deterministically, here are symbolic agents, we define the goals, I as a human define what tasks are going to be happening, and then the machine executes those tasks and achieves those goals. That is different than what everybody else thinks of agents to say, I as a human define the goals. Hey, let the robot figure out what the task is. Maybe the human gives a thumbs up and then the robot executes those tasks and the robot achieves the goals. The right-hand side is what everyone thinks of as agents. But to the end user doesn't care which one, right? To the end user, the goal has been achieved. They don't care whether it's deterministic and reliable on the left-hand side or probabilistic and unreliable on the right-hand side. To both of them, it seems like magic. So why don't you just symbolically, deterministically code up all the things that you can on the left-hand side, and then as you collect the data, you say, okay, I'm going to take all of the large language model created things and move them over to the symbolic side. That is, you could be able to take this and be able to say, I'm going to collect all the most common of the long tail and just move over to the right and put those into the reliable symbolic side. I think the winners in this game are going to be the people that collect on the symbolic left-hand side. And that's what we're doing in VLEX. If I upload a complaint, you can get about 200 pages worth of good analysis from that complaint, like about the same as about 200 hours worth of lawyers. And a workflow, analyze complaint, includes tasks. Like, what are the claims in this claim? What are the facts in this? Who are the parties? What are they looking for? These are all tasks that you might call an agent. And I've coded up all of these tasks, but that's actually not true. I coded up those tasks, but these tasks were made by the robot. That is, these are the right-hand side where we ask the large language model, now find other tasks that might be helpful to you. So in purple at the bottom are legal research tasks that the large language model said, hey, it's a copyright case. This is the New York Times versus OpenAI case. You might want to know about statutory and actual damages in copyright cases. Maybe you want to know about fair use in copyright. That the large language model came up with probabilistically. So this is actually a combination of human-created tasks along with machine-created tasks, putting them together. And I think the winners are going to be doing this combination. And because Dazza wanted me to show, oh, I didn't want to do that. I do want to do this one. Wanted me to show the tool. This is, you can vote on whether this is large language models deterministic or probabilistic. If you ask about trade secret law regarding former employees, stage 1 is to find a vector embedding search to find text that aligns with this question. Then stage 2, we have a second agent that summarizes how well this text answers the user's question. Stage 3 is we have another agent saying, okay, what percentage? American Reporter mostly answers this question, whereas another case might 100% answer this question here. So that's agent number 3. And then agent number 4 then drafts the memorandum that does this and takes the most relevant of these and then puts it over here. You might call that 4 agents. Is that an agent or is that just code? Well, it's symbolic, right? It's symbolic AI. I've coded these things up. The machine actually achieved those goals. So whether it's symbolic side or probabilistic side, the user doesn't care because to the end user, this is magic. So really the real question is, do we care whether it's the magical thing going or not? And so what if you could curate all the tasks, all the legal tasks? What if you were to say, yes, go ahead.
Say, Damien, would you characterize the use of those agents, the LLM-based agents that were doing evaluations and stuff? The second agent that was first doing a judgment and a rating on relevance, and then the third agent, which I think was doing like a more refined rate kind of assessment before it's handing it to the writing agent. Would you say those middle 2 agents that were doing those assessments were like evals?
You could definitely say that. And so you can almost think of it like you have the associate agent finding the case, and then you have the partner agent evaluating that, and then you have the senior partner doing this. And you can imagine the partner and the senior partner are evaluation. They're evaluating what they are. And so as compute gets cheaper and as the large language models get more efficient, you can imagine having not just 3 agents, but 10 agents or 20 agents or 50 agents or a near infinite number of agents to increase your precision of recall in a way that these agents can be able to check themselves. So as we think about what legal tasks are, you could be able to say, this is a patent that's got my name on it with a bunch of other people from Thomson Reuters. That patent was really talking about whether any legal task, whether it's a litigation task or a transactional task, you could be able to say, here are all the tasks in litigation or all the tasks in transactional work. And what if you were to collect all of those tasks and maybe after you leave Thomson Reuters, start a thing called Sally, where you collect all of these tasks for all the areas. That is all the areas of law, as well as all the services being provided by lawyers, as well as all the industries that you're doing this work in. And then now that you've collected all of the things that matter in the law, then you could be able to create synthetic data to be able to have the agents that are doing each of these tasks for each of these areas of law. The last thing I'll do before my time runs out is I clerked for 2 judges. You saw them earlier. Part of my job as a judicial clerk is I say, Your Honor, plaintiff says, defense says, judge, I think you should say. The problem is that the defendant says it on page 1 and the plaintiff says it on page 20. So I spent 12 hours kind of connecting the dots to be able to say, Your Honor, plaintiff says, defense says. And in the end of those 12 hours, I'd have something that looks a bit like this. To show breach of contract, You have to show number one, the contract existed, number two, plaintiff performed, and number three, defendant breached. And then you'd fill in the blanks. And then only after 12 hours, I realized, my God, plaintiff missed element number two, therefore they lost. But it would take me 12 hours to do this work. I need an agent to do this. And so I thought, well, I work for a large language model company that has all the cases, all the statutes, and all the regulations. And my proof of concept using Claude is to say, here's 6 briefs, create 5 levels of headings, subheadings with this brief. And here defendant says, plaintiff says. Here's a summary of the argument, verbatim argument. And now I'm able to create a bench memo, not in 12 hours, but in minutes. This is not deciding the case. This is giving the judges a head start. I joke that I build plaintiff spots and I build defense spots. That's shrinking the cost of litigation and increasing the volume of litigation, which is overwhelming the courts. So I'm building court bots to be able to deal with that influx in volume. But the thing is, a lot of judges don't have clerks like me. So this is giving a clerk to the clerk list. That is, we're giving agents to the judges to deal with this influx in cases. So this is what we're building with Vincent. I can upload all of the motions and cross motions for summary judgment. And then we say, Article 3 standing, here's plaintiff's arguments and defense arguments. Here's verbatim arguments. Here's a citation to the cases. And this is a bench memo done in seconds. We even go beyond what I did as a litigator for a judicial clerk. I say, here are the weaknesses in plaintiff's case. Plaintiff is weak on standing and First Amendment. Defendant's weak at budget neutrality. And then we go beyond that to say, what hard questions can we ask counsel at oral argument to be able to say, hey, how do you address the requirement of municipal taxpayer standing or direct expenditure of municipal tax funds? It gives me hundreds of these questions that the judge can be able to drill the lawyers. Obviously good for the judges, also good for the litigants, because now I can shadow box with myself. I can say, what might the judges ask me and be ready to answer each of these questions. Is this agentic? Hell yes. 100% symbolic. I coded all these things up saying that I, as a judicial clerk, did all these things. But I'm combining the symbolic AI, my prompting, with the large language model to be able to actually achieve these goals. So as we think about what is an agent, I think we've all been thinking about the magical thing on the right-hand side. The bots just go out and do the things. And that's really attractive to the coders that really don't know the subject matter of law. But to somebody who knows the subject matter of law, give me symbolic every day of the week. Because symbolic is deterministic, reliable, not the rabbit holes that go down the probabilistic side. So the winners in this game, talking to you mid-page, the winners in this game are going to be people that are able to combine that symbolic side and the probabilistic side to be able to code up deterministically and fill in the gaps with the programmatic side. I think I did it under 27 minutes.
You're amazing. All right. There you go. All right. Let's do Q&A. All right, we might have ideas or questions for you.
All right, questions? I thought a lot about this. I did a LinkedIn post about loophole bots. You can imagine that you could be able to, as you're drafting laws, say, here's a law and let's analyze where all the loopholes are. And a loophole might be considered a bug. that is where the law says something, but there's an unintended consequence of that we often call a loophole. So you can imagine bot number 1 creates the law. Bot number 2 says, are there any loopholes to that? Bot number 3 says, correct those loopholes, and then repeat that process in an iterative way until all the loopholes go away. That might be in the way of drafting, but there's also, you can imagine lobbyists and tax lawyers would love to have a loophole identification bot to be able to actually essentially brute force and otherwise find errors in laws to be able to find loopholes where and nobody else had. So yes, it should be done to be able to create laws, to be able to get rid of loopholes and unintended consequences, but it could also have the black hat or the gray hat doing the other side too. Other thoughts or questions? Well, that goes to my least worst. Do I follow German law? Or do I follow Texan law? Well, which has bigger penalties and which I'm most likely to be prosecuted under? That could be done programmatically. You could be able to say, okay, how many prosecutions have there been in Germany? How many prosecutions in Texas? What's the German penalty? What is the Texas penalty? And it can actually maybe set a mathematical threshold as to the percentage risk of it happening in Germany times the penalty in Germany versus the percentage risk in Texas times the penalty, and just do that mathematically. Yeah, it's being used by judges, it's being used by arbitrators. A big arbitration association whose name you know that I can't say is using it right now. The arbitrators are using it. And so you can imagine if I had said, I say, Your Honor, plaintiff says, defense says, judge, I think you should say, we don't do the number 3. We just say plaintiff says, defense says. If the judge wants to prompt, say, now, what do you think based on this analysis? What should I do? We're going to let him do it, right? But the fact that we don't give that as a button, we just say plaintiff says, defense says, that's just what their clerks do. And arbitrators don't have clerks. And a lot of judges don't have clerks. So we're giving a clerk to the clerkless and a way to help them think through things in a way that they could do in the past. People say, Vincent doesn't do things that I couldn't do. It does things I don't have time to do. So the judges just don't have time to be able to connect page 1 to page 20. So this gives them that time to do the analysis themselves, or maybe to get insights from the bot if they want to. Mm. Yeah, weasel words. Oh, 100%. That's part of my prompts, right? So that I talked with contract lawyers, and they say, yeah, we build in ambiguity, and it's only because I build in my ambiguity, and you on the other side build in your ambiguity. That's the only way we get deals done. Because if we didn't do that ambiguity, no deal would ever get done. So you can imagine as you draft, you can maybe do that creative ambiguity, the weasel words. That's on the transactional side, and on the litigation side, you can imagine that you could prompt to say things like, "You're Clarence Darrow. You want to be able to tell a really good story for my side, and you want to have my client be the white hat." And I'm giving away some prompting secrets, but yeah, there's lots of things you could do on the prompting side to be able to say weasel words on transactional side, tell a good story on the litigation side. Hey, Kyle's amazing. Mm-hmm.
What do we do about that? For accuracy, validation.
Frogs in the forms of hallucinations or errors, or what kinds of frogs are you worried about? Sure. And that goes to the evaluation part that Dazza has really talked a lot about. There are things that are just wrong. Is Roe v. Wade good law? The answer is no, right? If you answer yes, that is the wrong answer, right? There's another thing to say, did in the retrieval step, did it actually reproduce what the source text did, or did it not reproduce, hallucinate? That is also right and wrong. So there's a lot of binary right and wrong things, but then there's also a lot of beauty is in the eye of the beholder kind of things. That is this a beautifully written brief that's going to win for this judge? Ask 10 lawyers that question, you're going to have 15 or 17 answers, right? And so is this a beautifully written contract that is going to get the deal done? And again, you get 17 answers for 10 lawyers. And so I think that you have a binary getting things wrong, and then you probably just have the large language models, bot number 2, bot number 3, validating or invalidating those outputs. But for beauty is in the eye of the beholder kind of questions, if we can't evaluate whether your brief is better than my brief, or whether your contract is better than my contract as humans, what hope do we have to evaluate those kinds of things with machines? So until we have a human agreement as to whether your brief is more beautiful than mine, whether your contract is more effective than mine, we're never going to be able to evaluate those things for bots. Thank you.
Damien.
The man, the legend. Okay. And what a great question about what happens when things go sometimes terribly wrong, because next up, Andor is actually going to now hearken back to an hour and some minutes ago when I said Article 10B of Uniform Electronic Transactions Act has a provision, at least for agents conducting transactions, for what happens when there's an error that the agent introduces and the transaction doesn't go the way that the transacting party using the agent had intended. And this is so, depending on the context, a lot of different things happen when there's errors. Like, is it malpractice in some context? Is it something else in some other context? Is it a tort or whatever? Well, for transactions, which is more along the lines of what Diana was talking about in one of our kind of core use cases to anchor this discussion, we do have a set of rules, but the answers just produce more questions. So to help us start to get our head around, what does it really mean to provide someone with an opportunity to prevent or correct an error? It's actually a little trickier than you might think. So to kind of get us really into it, I want to introduce Andor, who's been a terrific collaborator and who's actually put fingers to keyboard, which we ultimately respect here, and built something that we can look at, consider, and respond to. So put your hands together for a live demo by Andor.
Awesome. Thank you, Dazza. And Dazza has been just a wonderful collaborator as well. We started discussing this, I think, almost about a month ago, a little bit more than that. And I became in love with this project. It was just really fun. So this ended up becoming most of our weekend activities, basically working on this. And as you can see, this presentation is called Going Bananas for Bananas, because we're going to be tackling a very simple use case as sort of the demo, and as well as to kind of explain the situation. But this is mostly to prompt discussion. All right, let's keep on going. All the code is on GitHub. If you want to go play with it yourself, that's super important. So feel free to just go on there and hack away, send PRs, send it issues. You can see some of the conversations and discussions. Leave that up for a second.
Yeah, check out the issues. They're hilarious and awesome.
Yeah, we had to go through a lot. And as Dazza was mentioning, it's not straightforward, actually. And so most of the things that you'll see are questions and so forth. Also check out this post Dazza put together. It's actually really helpful in understanding some of the nuances with the errors and UAT errors. Goes into the details a little bit more even in this presentation in some capacities. Okay, so first of all, what's the goal? So first I'm going to explain a little bit what UTA Section 10 does. And I'm not a lawyer, I'm an engineer. So this is something that Dazza is actually far more into the nuances of, but I have dealt with it enough to know what it means practically from an implementation standpoint and to ask the right questions. See how kind of the tech works and where the questions are. And clicky things, because if anybody knows what the IETF is, it's a standards organization. We reject kings, presidents, and voting. We believe in relative consensus and working code. So we try to put everything to the test with live code when possible, to see where things break. And there's a lot to cover. There's 4 different implementations of various things. We have a little demo app. We have a little example of a Stripe SDK, an open AI agent SDK, which is one of the new agent SDKs going out. And if anybody knows, who knows what MCP is? Okay, well, I was not expecting that knowledge of that. But yeah, so MCP also playing with that and sort of understanding the nuances there and the customer and user experience there. There's ad hoc MCP server, as well as liability calculator, start thinking about what is the actual impact of a business if you're not considering this. And nothing's perfect. We're favoring breadth over depth. Seeing what's possible, what's breaking, and learning and having fun. That's kind of it. I'm going to go through, sorry, I don't know how that got canceled. Okay, so we start off with a story. Robbie, the agent, grandma goes to Robbie, the agent, says, hey, Robbie, I want to buy some bananas. Go buy them for me. Robbie goes to the market and searches far and wide, finds some bananas, purchases some bananas from the store owner, and the store owner accepts the purchase, sends the bananas back to grandma. Grandma comes back and says, oops, I didn't want this many bananas. How do I fix this? And so grandma calls the store owner and says, I need to solve this problem. You just sent me way too many bananas. And so there must be a mistake somewhere. I need a refund. So who's liable, and how does this work? In section 10, there's basically this really critical point, which says that if the agent provider does not provide, and the seller provide an opportunity for the prevention or correction of error, which means promptly notifying or taking reasonable steps to notify the person that's interacting with the agent provider, they are now, the person that has done the transaction is now capable of remitting the transaction and not actually disallowing it as a faulty transaction. So from that perspective, you're liable as an agent provider if you don't provide a remediation step. Same with if you're a seller and you have no way to remediate it. So you have a requirement to basically give mechanisms to reduce your liability. So what happens if you don't do this and the impact? Your transactions might not be finalized, and that could leave your business in a weird position. So this is a potentially big problem. So how do AI agents change things? This is an act since 1999, but there's new interfaces and tooling. It's less explicit. The agency makes it more difficult to debug. Human entry points may change, and we'll get into that in a little bit. It's more difficult to classify what an error is because it's not as explicit as before. And actually, this was an interesting one that came up. I'm actually at, there's another workshop going on today called Internet Identity Workshop. And I talked to a lot of cryptographers there and attack vectors and how these attack vectors are going to be really interesting with AI and how they'll attack actually marketplaces as well. So that's going to be something very interesting. So looking at it from a seller's perspective, how does the store owner protect himself? How does the store owner resolve issues around Robbie going rogue? And how does the agent provider communicate practically with grandma and the store owner effectively? And so this is the base sort of UATA error handling stack. You have the pre-transaction validation, which is before the transaction even goes through, check if the stuff makes sense. Error detection, which is a lot more squishy, which can deal with something as simple as heuristics to something much more complicated, which would be using some sort of inference model to determine that there's a potentially erroneous transaction somewhere. Then you have correction mechanisms, which is the transactions happen, but you still have time to remediate it. Once a transaction has actually occurred and you've actually moved the money over, it doesn't necessarily mean that the person on the other end has actually fulfilled the use of it, right? So for example, if you've bought some bananas, it still takes some time for delivery and for somebody to actually eat them. So they haven't actually received the value yet. So there is a chance to remediate it. Go ahead.
Comment. I just want to thank you.
Oh, sorry.
I just want to point one thing out to people, which is a practice that we like here and that we encourage you to continue when we break into discussions. Notice what a good job Andor did with the entities. So on the left, we have agent provider. That's not software, that's not platform. We're actually identifying a legal party so we can start to get traction on otherwise imponderable technical diagrams. And there is platforms and agent as a service behind there. Principal consumers like the user, if we want to use the technical word, third-party sellers like the merchant, or it's like the purchase or the shopping cart. Like there's technical terms, there's legal terms, and there's like kind of the business roles. And like he's done a great job of starting to align those on this diagram so that we can actually find a reliable, predictable answer and we can make it a solvable problem, which he's about to solve.
Not solve, but just ask more questions mostly. But yes, thank you. And then auditability is just being able to provide loggings and ability for people to actually ask, what did my agent do on my behalf, right? So error correction is probably the hardest of them, by the way, because that one depends a lot on the good. So if you look at most of the other ones, we can kind of do that generalizably, but the one I found out that was most difficult to actually demo is error correction. So what could have happened in the transaction of grandma ordering too many bananas that she could have potentially stopped this transaction? Well, the agent provider could have reached out to her and said, are you sure you want to buy 10 bananas? Or the seller could have contacted the agent and proxied to the customer saying, grandma, are you sure you want to buy these 10 bananas? And if there was a potential route for that, right? And that's not today really possible. And like I said, error correction is difficult. So we'll run through some actual technical demos now. Like I said, they're mostly proof of concept to show how things could work and where are things we need to test and pursue more. They're not answers to the problem, they're questions to the problem. So we'll go through that. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to show one last slide. If you guys know MCP, I'm going to show you a demo that's ad hoc and kind of built over a React app. But before that, there's kind of two models here we can think about how the consumer interacts with the interface. So one is the model where they go onto a website, which is the traditional model today, and they're interacting via a chat agent or something else, and they make a purchase order there directly on the website. You can think about going onto any normal website you do today. But there's another model which we should be thinking about because there's technical things that need to happen to make this process work, which is what happens if the entire interaction flow is happening over a single client like OpenAI, ChatGPT, or Claude. And there are certain restrictions if you're talking about an intermediary on the agent provider itself versus having full control over the interfaces and the UI. And that actually has some pretty big implications. So this is an example of me doing the same demo over MCP, over, in this case, Claude, but I also have an example with OpenAI and Stripe SDK. So I'll pull off to the demo. Oops, that's not the right one. Okay, so LLMs are really difficult to be deterministic, and so it's very hard to show errors in LLM demo. So what we're going to do is actually hard code these errors just to show what the process could look like. But then you can easily see how this extends out to an LLM where it's less certain. So in this case, we make a purchase order as an agent, and this is just creating a purchase order like a normal app. And it's going to go through, and I have an agent dashboard and a seller dashboard. And the seller is going to get the order, and you can see here there's a set of orders fulfilled on its account. And on the agent side, there's logs and ability for this to happen autonomously. There's no things that have been flagged because this is a normal transaction. Now, what I'm going to show you here is we're going to make an error transaction. I'm going to order, let's say, 10 eggs. But somehow in the process of prompting the LLM, I want to buy some eggs, it added a 10x amount to it. So instead of ordering 10 eggs, it ordered 100 eggs. So in this case, the agent provider could relay back to the human a request, please approve this transaction. Please acknowledge that this is a faulty transaction, or this is potentially a faulty transaction, asking the human to approve it. Now, how this works in this very baseline model is just heuristics. But what could easily happen is, you use previous behaviors and all these other things to actually flag and figure out which are the transactions you should be flagging to the user. If I've approved it, which I will right now, you'll notice the seller has also sent back a request to me to approve it, because as a seller, I'm now curious, is this a real transaction or is this a faulty transaction? So I want to have a mechanism to replay it back. Now, in this case, the seller has access to my UI in this little demo, but in the practical case, they may not. So there actually needs to be ways for the seller to reach out to the buyer through the agent to be able to make that that request to the agent to the human for confirmation. And if we do this autonomously and we do this at scale, I can set this up where this agent will continue to process a ton of transactions and buy me groceries all day. So at scale over time, this can be quite a bit of transactions. So one thing to think about is how the user experience just shifts as you're starting to get hundreds of transactions, thousands of transactions happening on your behalf as a consumer, having to prove it along the way. That can get quite tedious over time. Let me pull back here. There's a few other demos. Everybody's following so far? Cool. So now, what does it mean for business? So if you don't protect yourself, if you don't have any ways to raise an escalation path to a user to say, approve a transaction, make sure that it's caught, well, assuming that you know your numbers, which I don't know what a business's numbers is, and this is an area that would be really interesting, we can actually try to project what might that look like for a business and how much of a percentage of revenue they would be at risk at as part of the liability. So this is a little calculator. You can go onto it. It's uat-calculator.agentoverlay.com, and you can play with it and just see what would be a potential reasonable parameterization. But as you increase the number of agent-handled transactions and your error rates, you might be incurring a whole bunch of potential liability if you're not careful. So at the bottom of it, it shows your potential liability, which would be 1.75% of your total revenue under this model. So it's very simple, but it's a way to start playing and testing the system, and we can probably build better models to understand what is the actual liability here. Cool. Then, what's up?
I'm just trying to signal.
All right, now with the MCP and OpenAI Stripe SDK, there's two things that it can do that's pretty interesting. One is you can create payment links, and so we can quickly do that right now. The other thing is it can actually wrap in existing LLM models, so you can actually charge per usage. So in this case, if I go to this app right here and say list my products. And then let's buy one this. Gonna go and send me a payment link. And in this case, the user experience is I am actually, because the payment link will send me to the Stripe account, I don't have to pay with my own, user. So this is another experience where the users are actually paying with their own hands, but the agents are initiating the transaction. So the users would be the final transactor here. And so they would have that confirmation if they're doing this part. So there's a lot of ways these tools can be engaged. So there's a ton of challenges. I'm going to breeze over because I think we're almost out of time. There's a ton of work to do. So if you're interested, please collaborate on the GitHub repo. Please help out and continue the collaboration, because this is really fun work and there's a lot of work to do here to improve the models and to understand better what to do. And if you'd like to get in contact, that's my email. And thank you very much.
Andor. Don't get past me, sir. So are they, let me just say, so first of all, that was awesome. And wait, who's on, what's going on here? Or could you come off the Zoom?
Oh, yeah.
Perhaps? Check 1, 2. Thank you. So that was awesome. One of the things we like it partly because the lineage is back to MIT is like, we like to engineer stuff and then see what reality is. So it's just so useful. And thanks for being such a great collaborator on this. Notice, by the way, that arguably, not only is this an application of law, but this is a kind of set of evals. They're deterministic evals with an algorithm, but this is a good example of why I was saying evals, evals, evals. Evals can make it so that we can successfully transition into an age of LLMs with our values and and our models intact, evolved but intact. Are there any questions or comments or feedback for Andor on this? We've got a few. Okay.
When I saw you liability compensation.
Yeah.
I'm really thinking about that risk factor.
Mm-hmm.
You have a quantified risk. So there's a structure. Maybe you find a target to take.
No, we're just exploring. So that's a really good idea, actually. I really like that idea. And if you're interested in collaborating on that, that'd be cool to extend the model and figure out how we could. Yeah, that's really cool. I like that.
Yeah, we can catch up.
Yeah.
So we already have
Yep. 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 So one of the actually conversations I had today, which was fascinating, was sorry if I'm losing my voice. A cryptographer I was talking to, his headspace went to what are the attack vectors, and where his head went to was there's work happening where you can get the LLM to basically particularly like certain gradients, so basically there's certain things that you can write in the text and so forth to make the LLM prefer your product, and you can price it in a crazy way. So one of the attack vectors is not just, you know, how it is today where the markets are actually alternating, like in terms of the pricing, but because the gradient got screwed up and somehow it's inference, it actually buys something completely out of market rate because of how it just inferred against that data. And so now you're buying it 10x the price it was rather than the 30%. So I think it's going to be much worse, to be frank. And it's you know, there could be a lot of those attack vectors all over the net. So it's a really great question. I don't have an answer besides more questions. Yeah, it's a really good question. So it's very difficult to do, which is why I chose a very deterministic approach to do it. Because there's this whole, you know, when you actually set an agent loose and you actually kind of do this, especially over sort of a chat interface versus a UI, it's kind of, yeah, I mean, you don't really know why it's thinking the thing it's thinking. And I didn't actually show here, there was, I have a whole Grafana dashboard where it shows all the metrics of like what's happening over time. So that observability is really helpful. So Grafana is like a metrics dashboard. You can go and see what's happening over time. So I can go and look at this at scale and see how my agent's performing over my month and over the 10 minutes. It takes a while to collect the data when I just started to kick it off. But yeah, that's the best. I think the best way to find it is through like aggregate metrics where you can look at behaviors over time rather than a single transaction is how I'm finding it's most valuable. Cool.
So good.
Thank you.
Share, see if that works. No, next up, we've got my colleague and friend, Tobin South, who came from MIT, is now landed here at Stanford, where it's actually nice and sunny. And he's got a really important angle that I knew this day would be incomplete without, which is what does authorization look like? What does authentication look like? How is this delegated to agents? How do we express it? How do we manage it? And what are the issues, options, and opportunities that arise when we try to solve these things? For some answers and some more questions, Tobin South.
Brilliant. Thank you, Dazza. There are so many, you're all asking the right questions. I think those three last questions were really good. There's a question of search engine optimization for agents, which is a rapidly growing industry. How do you choose what choices made by an agent? How do you optimize for an agent? There are de-risking questions around insurance. This is a very green field of technical questions in addition to the legal questions. And so very briefly, I wanted to highlight kind of what do we do from here? You've seen some technical demos, you've seen some big legal questions. How can we take action? Because this space is moving really fast. The model context protocol that people have mentioned earlier didn't exist 6-7 weeks ago. And it is rapidly becoming a standard that the entire industry is working around. Which means we wrote a piece on authenticated delegation. How do you authorize AI agents? What does it mean to delegate authority? And then 4 weeks later, a protocol came out. Didn't have any support for this. In the last 3 weeks, at least 20 different people I know have built out a technical toolkit to provide this, which means the usual pace of AI change is now hitting us from multiple angles when it comes to technology. So, concretely, how can everyone in this room be helpful? So, Andor and I just came from a technical workshop building out tooling for AI agents. What does it mean to actually authenticate, actually make these things robust? How do you surface them on the web to be discoverable, but not have privacy violations in that process? There are questions of how do you do a human in the loop? If you use a deep research on, it will call 100 different websites in 30 seconds. Google's even faster. We'll do it. Very nice. If you want to make sure as a human you're in control of that process, you're going to have 100 different web pages open. Are you sure you want to use this website? Do you trust this website? You don't. You actually really don't want that. But at the same time, if you let an agent run free and just do whatever it wants, then you've completely lost control. So how do you find the right level of burden on the person? We had a workshop recently here at Stanford with someone from OpenAI whose main comment was consumers don't care. They want to say to their robot, buy me bananas, and they would like bananas to be delivered. They don't want to ask extra questions in that process. So how do you build technology that mediates between these two? So, okay, that's one angle. This is a very short presentation, I promise you, is tooling, it's technical part. And not to harp on what Dazza is always saying, but the next big part is evaluations. Right? How do you actually make this safe? Various people have touched on this, but this is huge. This is both an emerging industry and something we need in collaboration with a bunch of people. So we have a bunch of partnerships already, both with AI lab providers, with people building the model context protocol, with vendors you might want to connect to say, how do you actually test that stuff will work? Right? The law only matters once something goes wrong in some sense. It's just pontification until something happens. Right? The same is true for testing systems. You can design the best possible system in the world, but if you don't actually form a real environment, a safe sandbox environment to test things in, everything will break. But the key highlight I want to this community is we've been in all these technical conversations today, yesterday, all throughout the last many weeks. And everyone just wants to talk to the lawyers. Guys are the bane of my existence. Because every one of these technical questions, where a human needs to be brought into the loop, what level of delegated authority is acceptable, and where does that map to liability? How do you evaluate against that? Comes down to legal questions. So the entire technical community is screaming for lawyers to answer their questions. And I think the duty is on all of us in the room to come up with an answer. At least partially, things will change and help solve them. Okay. That is my whole pitch to like genuinely, please get engaged. Please answer these questions. To actually answer Dazza's call, but I acknowledge it's 4 p.m. and I want us to get to small group discussions. Very quickly, I just want to prime where I want that AI discussion to come in. There are lots of copyright questions about you're just using a chat model and it spits out the New York Times. How do we deal with that? How do we deal with the scraping problem? What are the rights in the web as to whether or not we can or cannot scrape that? That is a big and important problem to think about. The immediate problem in many ways, and what I think this workshop's really about, is about this interaction between an AI system and some external service. It's going to go do a thing. Doing a thing is a really scary concept because harms occur when things are done. And so the whole point of delegated authority, this is just taking an illustrative picture, is there are a bunch of things we can put in to this interaction between any digital service. When you're buying bananas online, you're doing something, you're filing your taxes. Between the user, between the AI doing something, and the digital service, how do we get in between those two and insert some productive, legally binding tools that actually make it safe? Whether it's identifying the risks and limitations of AI systems, whether it is creating robust permission sets, this is called scoping. When you let someone log into your Gmail, you can say you cannot send emails on my behalf. You can read them, but you can't send them. Right? You might give it access to your contacts, or you might not. When you open your iPhone, it says, do you want to sync all your contacts? No. Currently, Operator, when it logs into something, when OpenAI's Operator logs into something, gets everything. So it literally, I don't know, for those who have used it, ask it to log into a service. It will say, I pinky swear I'm not looking, type in your password, I won't look, and then it has your account. So we need more robust systems than that. And we can do lots of interesting and useful legal properties as part of this, like signatures. So that is the extent of my pitch. This is a huge problem that needs lawyers right now, and I would love to chat to people on how we solve it. That's the end. Beautiful.
Good. Don't go anywhere. Question. Question time.
So one of the big differences between law and is that we have a 50-year history of digital signatures being filed. You're trusted, you're not trusted based on signature. But in fact, trust is much more gray.
Mhm.
It's much more gradiated. And the technologists don't have the language
Mhm.
to define, when, things require risk and require high trust and a lot more verification, and then if there was like one thing there is really to figure out what are these gradients of gray. I mean, I shouldn't have to have biometric authentication, using my eyes to report a dead cat in the room.
Mhm.
I'm doing
Mm. I think privacy is a huge consideration here. So there was recently some work we did with OpenAI, which says if you run a website right now, you might use one of these services that tracks user patterns. So you can kind of optimize the user flows. And you will see 10% of your web traffic is just these nonsense users that like they click here, and then suddenly they instantly click here, and then they go do something weird. And these are bots interacting with the website, either for scraping or interacting as an operator. And increasingly, websites are blocking access to bots and/or requiring login or authentication. You also see examples like this, like Facebook is requiring age-based login, which requires you to give in a government ID. You end up with a bunch of privacy concerns. And as agents get better, we will need to protect digital spaces better, which also violates privacy more. And so creating robust tooling around this is a big topic of conversation. Really good.
I would say that on the ambiguity side of it, there's ambiguity on the gray shades of gray on being able to say, should I make the authenticated by identify that? There's similar ambiguity in the legal side, because really all lawyers do is assess risk and be able to push risk from my side to your side. So it's kind of a zero-sum game that we as lawyers are saying, okay, what's the likelihood of that thing happening to clients? And then what's the penalty? Bad result, how much money? So I want to push the likelihood of bad things happening to you. So as we think about lawyers getting answers to that, really it's lawyers that we're going to deal with last time. And I think that lawyers, they have all the incentives in the world to say yes, and saying it's all right. Because why would I put my neck in the line and say, no, you're AOC putting it up this way? As we think about one of the solutions, we have to think about the game parties. And number two, how do we get the liability, tax liability again?
Interesting. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We created culture because but now we want to actually use the operator and take action.
Yeah.
We want
Yeah. Well, I agree, but want to push back. I think capture is absolutely critical because you don't want a AI agent who's attached to nobody doing things on login.gov. You want an AI agent that it represents a real human being doing something. And it is in that like definitional relationship that you solve the liability. Again, we cannot sue and fire amorphous concepts. Could be an organization. Absolutely. But one of the way.
So in terms of
yeah.
So how much of the law of that exists?
I mean, so that is a genuine question that I think is really good. I think the correct answer is we can only use laws that currently exist, because the pace of change is too great for us to really wait for the courts to make new decisions or write legislation. I'm very skeptical on us writing legislation at the timely manner. We might be wrong.
When a group of people have best practices, share those best practices, use those best practices, they begin to, form law in a way. It's not the physical require legislation, standards around what electrical appliances, safety, and all that kind of stuff. They're not codified in law. They're codified in custom. So I would really say we need to start working on what are the what are
Brilliant. There are questions at the very back, but otherwise,
Is there, okay.
do you want to shout?
Okay. So what are you next, by the way? Speaker, and pose question or topic, and then that's the procedure. And then people that want to further explore that can sort of go to their table. Don't have two speakers at the same table. Sit down at the table and you sort of go to that table if you want to talk about that. If you don't sit at your table, so you want to talk about something else. We'll do that for a while and we'll do it one person. I'll take the moderators privilege to say to the question about norms and customs that develop and the need to have those to create our own norms. That's part of what Stanley was talking about, why we convened this thing at HAI for finding
I'm curious, talk about other capabilities you're proposing and kind of an important follow-up. Who's doing the enforcing of that convention? Are you just using that delegation to make a log of what the agency do, or are you expecting all the other services to implement the credentialing system and expect the AI to
So I think that's a great question. In general, for things that are simple, e.g., can you access XYZ? It's very easy to enforce that. We already enforce that in the web. When you want to try and access, you give access to your Twitter, you give it read or write permission to certain parts of your Twitter. Questions that are more wishy-washy, natural language comments, e.g., don't, break fiduciary duty, that is much harder to enforce. And something that, in some sense, you need another AI to enforce. And is a very good technical question that people are currently thinking about of wrapping around it. So, great question.
Awesome. Cool. Okay. And so, thank you so much, Tobin. Tobin South, am I right? It's going places. So now we know what some of the issues and options and opportunities, but basically, especially the challenges and the questions that we have to dig into with respect to authenticated delegation to AI agents. So I want to thank everybody, especially those of you online who are, I know it was not as interactive as we might have had. I'll take responsibility. At MIT, I know exactly how to organize all the AV. This is the first one I've done at Stanford, so we'll get better at this. And we'll follow up by email for everybody that registered so that you can find out more about next steps. There are next steps. We'll be doing more convening. We'll be sharing more of the learnings from this workshop, and there'll be more opportunities to participate and to collaborate. as in the fullness of time, this starting that we've done here becomes something, what we envision is something like a legal track with the other tracks that like Tobin is doing on hardcore sandboxing for prototyping, and Sandy and team have some other tracks that are doing some other things as we kind of convene industry and researchers and others to help make sense of this. But we've got a seat at the table here from Codex on a legal track, and this will continue. So this is just a starting gun, and so having said that, what we're going to do now is break into some small groups. And what I'd like to ask is for the speakers to come up kind of one at a time and to say what they want to talk about. And it could be a question, it could be a challenge, it could be an idea that you want to go deeper into. And then, as I mentioned before, each one will go to a different table. So listen to what each person says and ask yourself, is there one of those things I most would like to talk about? Just go and self-select yourself to their table, have a conversation. We'll see how much time we have. We should get out by 5. So maybe we'll do that for about 40 minutes or something, or about 35 minutes. And then we'll come up and all hear from each other, like how those conversations went. And that will complete our program. So with that, why don't we get started in this order? Thanks.
Let me also pitch that working group at Stanford. We have different streams. We have a legal stream, which you should all get involved with. There is a technical stream if you want to talk tech and sandboxing and evals. There is an economic stream if you want to talk about, de-risking, financializing these things, transactions. There is a big enough cake for everyone to eat something. We would love to have people involved in that. My question will be, I'm gonna claim, I would love to talk about the principal agent problem from a technical perspective. And anyone with thoughts on that?
Beautiful. Who's next?
So there's 3 words mentioned in sequence: eval. I'm actually really curious how we can improve the liability model that I posted up there. It's a calculator, and how to think about evals. And as a technical person, I'd love to get some other insights here. So that's the topic I'd like to talk about.
Mine is going to be alignment with human values as laws, and then also symbolic versus the probabilistic side, bringing those together.
Okay, since the LLM-friendly terms of service seem to be compelling, I want to talk about how we could practically get there. What are the steps we could take short, medium, and long term?
Perfect. Good. You sit here. Let's get everyone's face visible. Okay, this is our group picture. Perfect. All right, so now to your starting table. So like speakers spread out and come and hang out with the speaker that you most are interested in. And again, if you want to just have your own group, then pick another table.
Can we mix halfway through?
We can mix.
It's free for all.
Yeah.
Dazza and Diana. Okay, perfect. All right, so we just had some invigorating conversations. We'll consider them the opening salvo of longer conversations to come. And what can we get some quick report outs? And do you want to get started?
Yes,
Okay.
okay.
Microphone or not?
Oh,
I don't think they're working anymore.
Okay, yeah, we're good.
Oh, it
We're
does.
I'm just on this random stair, okay. Okay, so something very cool happened, which was someone has built Legal Lens, which actually is a Chrome plugin that reads terms of service and allows you, it summarizes them and allows you to use a chatbot, which was really awesome to learn. We also got to learn about some of the complexities with that, which is the terms of service are spread out all over the place. There's lots of different links, really complicated, and it actually, you sort of need a sitemap or a taxonomy, and standardization would be super helpful, even using LLMs. And then we also came around to figuring out that terms of service are really important in a lot of use cases. So the other table, Andor's table, came over to talk to us and said, well, do the AI agents need to be reading each other's terms of service every time they do an interaction with one another? And then we had the whole conversation about, well, it depends what model they're using, and we realized there's a gap in that infrastructure-only model that Perplexity is using, where Perplexity is clicking a box for you that you've agreed to the terms, but you have no idea what they are. So that's like, there's kind of these hidden things that we're uncovering in these workflows where there's some gaps that need help, and there's so much more to discuss that we can get to, so yes. That's
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Diana. Authenticated Delegation handled that.
We talked about the top-down, we talked about politics and law are inextricable, and that you need to do that. A really good point was brought up saying that if we build these kind of tools, will US law colonialize, say, Kenyan law? Because there's more volume of US law, more volume, and then we will essentially edge out Kenyan law. So we talked about maybe we could tag up all the things in US law, like Aliyah is doing, where they're doing a bottom-up analysis of all the statutes, and being able to say murder is a concept, and stealing is a concept, and be able to extract all that in US law, do the same thing for Kenyan law, and then be able to harmonize those, and then be able to have, everyone's talking about murder, everyone's talking about stealing, and then be able to harmonize that in a way that maybe is less colonial, and be able to say this is the Kenyan way versus the US way, and then also being able to say that maybe we should be able to create knowledge graphs of the law and make it free and open source, and that's probably a good idea.
That's great. That's aligned with Ed Walter's eternal desire to
That's right.
have a legal framework. Thank you, Damien.
So my table was mostly engineers, so we eventually pulled over to bring some legal folks in conversation by pointing us over to the fans table. But it was really good. We talked about ways to measure reliability and some of the challenges with it. Initially, starting off with what happens at scale when you start getting thousands of transactions as a seller. Kind of using the example that I used before. And we realized that unless you have some sort of way to bind the agents better and agent-agent transactions to legal frameworks, it becomes very difficult to mitigate your reliability. They'll probably be there no matter what. They'll be making errors at some level. And so then we pulled it over to Diana to we'll talk about terms of service and how multi-agent coordination will be impacted by terms of service and what happens when your agent talks to another agent and they're all talking different terms of service and they don't necessarily read each other's. So that was the conversation. It was really good.
Awesome. Woo. You can get the answers.
Questions are good.
I feel like all of these discussions were way too branchy to be summarized in 1 minute. We started about talking about the difference between authentication and authorization, what are you allowed to do, and then started talking about how you de-risk that. I think the one takeaway I got is a lot of the conversations we have are about individual single transactions or interactions with AI, but in reality, what really matters is how these things play out in aggregate and how you assess risks and harms over those aggregates of transactions and shifting the mental model towards that. Also, I wanted to note from earlier, on the note of the working group, I think everyone here's a good fit to join the legal working group, which Dazza is running, and everyone should email Dazza about their thoughts at the end of this session, and then he will rope you into more and more of this.
And what are examples of some of the other groups that people might be interested
Right,
in?
and if you're interested in the pure technical group, you can also email Dazza, and then Dazza will forward it to me. Or there's a whole economics group that's being run out of the Digital Economy Lab at High. So more so thinking about the long-term economic effects, how you build a fair economy with AI agents, and a bunch of great questions there.
Awesome. Thank you, Tobin. Okay, and with that, we now adjourn the first annual or whatever decennial for the first 100-year convening of the AI and law, the AI agents and law working group. Thank you for helping to co-create this new stream together, and hopefully together we can make more sense of this and start to define and architect the kind of future we do wish to inhabit. So thank you very much for staying.